Fiona will unmute you at the appropriate time, or unmute yourself. Okay, if you're ready, Fiona.
Yeah, just bear with me just a couple of minutes. It's just uploading to YouTube. Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that we're live on YouTube now and you can start the meeting.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Zoom video conference meeting, which is a first for this committee. We have a number of people who are observing the meeting, so welcome to those people. If we can just go to the agenda, please, and we'll start off with the minutes, pages 7 till 12. Any comments on that accuracy, people? Okay, the only issue I'd like to raise, Fiona, is page 1, apologies for absence. It's showing Jackie Keane as giving apologies. I don't think Jackie was a member in January. I think it was before then. I wouldn't want her to have a mark saying that she hadn't attended when actually she wasn't a member. So if that could be confirmed, that would be really good.
Okay, we'll correct that.
Other than that, I have no comments. I can't see anybody shaking their head or waving at me. So if we can, before we move on, I just want to raise a point to Councillor Steve Cossa has left this group. He's been an absolutely outstanding contributor and someone who's been really enthusiastic. So it's a loss to this group. Normally we wouldn't get a replacement. I'm absolutely delighted that Councillor Foraszewski is joining us, someone equally as talented. So we're absolutely delighted that you're joining us, and we hope that you enjoy your time on this overview and scrutiny committee. So you're really welcome. Okay, so we can go for apologies and absence, please, Kimberly.
Thank you, Chairman. No, we've received no apologies for absence from the committee.
And I think that's absolutely brilliant. So that's really good. Kimberly, any declarations of interest?
No declarations sent in prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And if any member has, please shout. When you've obviously seen the agenda. Questions from member of the public, Kimberly?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. And questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Good, at this rate we'll be finished in 5 minutes. Okay, so if we can turn to item 6, please, which should be pages 13 to 26, which is the COVID-19 response and recovery to the voluntary organisations and community resilience. Councillor Hyman, I know that you've put yourself down to speak on this one. I don't know if you want to raise a question now.
No, I'll wait until the item has been introduced, and if I've got some questions, but others might ask them anyway. So I don't wish to interfere if I don't need to, but I'm sure my questions will be answered by other people. So if not, I'll speak later. Thanks very much.
Okay, so Andrew. Trying to find Andrew on my screen. There you are.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm here. If I might be able to, Chairman, I'd like to ask Katie Webb, our Community Services Manager, to introduce the report as she authored it.
Okay.
Hi, sorry, slightly unprepared. Normally I'd have a printed copy of the report, and I'm just trying to find it on my laptop. So excuse me, but I think I can talk through it having written it myself. So yeah, the communities report, it sort of covers 3 areas at the moment. So it's a bit about the service level agreements, organisations that we work with, where they were and what they were doing through the response phase of COVID-19. Then we talk a little bit about the magnificent response that we have via the community organisations that sort of set up during to help manage the response, and then talk a little bit about the recovery phase that we're now going into. In relation to the service level agreements organisations, you'll see that a number of them ceased to operate, suspended their services, should I say, during COVID-19, not shut down completely. And whereas we did have some of the organisations that really were quite intrinsic to the community services, particularly around the community meal services, Farnham Assist with befriending, Age UK, Surrey continue to deliver lots of befriending and phone calls and advice, and equally Assistance Advice Waverley. So it just gives you a flavour of what those organisations were doing during that time. Obviously, a number of them did struggle to deliver services due to the government restrictions through lockdown, and they're still waiting for the guidelines to how to reopen. All of the day centre services shut their day centre service down upon lockdown, but obviously 4 of them delivered the community meal service, which was just really brilliant. We also, looking at the financial impact, wrote to them in April to talk about their second tranche of payment for 2021, in light of the fact that they had suspended services, some had furloughed staff, so those costs were covered, and in light of the budget gap that we've got at the moment, which is, isn't it, nearing 5 million. So no decisions have been made around the second tranche of funding at this stage. This is all part of the looking at the financial and the aspects in the budget in the next few weeks, which I think there's a members briefing on in a week or so, if I'm correct. And then the latter part of the report really, so the second part talks about the success. I mean, it was phenomenal for us as a borough council, the fact that the community, local communities sort of galvanised together and created their own central hubs and groups where they brought together various organisations to deliver services to the more vulnerable and shielded, was absolutely amazing. You know, we couldn't have done it without them. I mean, there is no doubt that the community took control and delivered those services, and it's been a pleasure to work with them and promote them. Obviously, there's aspects where with the shielded, NHS shielded, of those phone calls and support was initially delivered by staff from Waverley Borough Council and Surrey County Council. I remember the Easter weekend where there were sort of 18 of us at any one time calling residents to ensure that they had food and prescriptions, etc. But now hopefully they will be moved to our social prescriber service, that there's sort of very few that are left on that list, and they'll be supported come the sort of end of July. So they'll be supported within the community, and that can only happen because there's been a tremendous community response and volunteer response that is still there. That infrastructure is still there to support those community members. One of the sort of pieces of work that we're kind of doing following the response phase in the recovery is sort of looking at how we can learn from this tremendous community cohesion and, you know, delivery, how we can still harness it, how we can work with it going forward, you know, as well as celebrating it. But I think for us, for our work in within the community is being able to get a real understanding now of what the needs are for the residents, because those needs have changed and some of the residents' needs will be different for quite a while, but actually work with our community groups and hubs to ensure that there is a good continuation of delivery in the sort of short medium term, and then looking at longer term how we will work with our voluntary sector and which voluntary organisations will survive the pandemic and which ones will thrive and be a success. So that's it in a kind of nutshell. And saying I still haven't found the report, just in case I missed anything. You might remind me if there's some questions, I come back.
I've just got a couple of points before we open it up. I think, to me, sometimes going through something like a pandemic, what it's done, it's created opportunities for the future. It has been absolutely incredible, the work that the voluntary organisations have done and how the council have played it. They've almost been the conductors of the orchestra, in my views. My fear is that when we get back to whatever normality is, that all this good work with the voluntary sector and all these people that have volunteered and these groups that have come forward, that they start to fritter away. So I suppose my plea is that it's really important that we don't lose all that fantastic work. And I know, Cttee, you'll be having the same view as me anyway, but it was just a point I wanted to raise.
Yeah, that's a key part of the recovery, is how do we harness it? How do we
improve it,
improve it, work on it, continue with this empowerment that the community have really shown us. So I think that's our learning, is actually how do we as a council now work with that community, because they really knew their community and what their community needed, and I think that's what was so incredible.
No, absolutely right. I think it's vital that Waverley, in my view, does a thank you event, whatever that looks like, whether that's in the hall. And I think if we don't, that will be insulting to the people who have stood up to the mark for us. I'm sure that will happen. Just a couple of very small points. In your report, you talk about the SWOT analysis, and I'm sure it has gone out to the parishes. It says community groups and voluntary faith, but have the parishes been sent the SWOT analysis as well?
We're going to interview the parish and town counts, but the SWOT analysis was basically to the organisations. We've just had a meeting about this today. So our next step is actually, we felt we should interview and have the conversation rather than just send out a document. So that's what we'll be doing in the next couple of weeks.
No, thank you. And one final bit, as you'll be aware that Councillor Else and others have done a working group working alongside you to look at the SLAs. I know some of the findings may well be changed. Now, Councillor Acosta was on that group. So I'm looking for a volunteer, and I'm probably looking for somebody like Councillor Forojewski, who I'm sure has got lots and lots of experience and knowledge and sort of desire to try and do something with that community groups and the day centres and everything else. But if I can go to Councillor Else, maybe if you just want to carry on some of those points.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry, but I don't have the facility to put my automatic hand up on this iPad. So I can do the thumbs up if that's what you'd like.
Just wave.
Instead.
Just wave. Just
wave, okay. I would just like to put on record from Kttee's report, 1.7 Farncombe Day Centre. I do congratulate them, and I'd just like that on record. They have done an amazing job at getting themselves organised. They've only got a small kitchen, and the fact that they're going to take on the Godalming area is just wonderful. And I love, I'm friends with them on Facebook, and the food they send out, I'd like to sign up myself. The other thing that just slightly worries me, 1.9, the Clock House seems not to have a manager. I just wondered, well, not conversation for this meeting perhaps, but it does look a bit worrying to me as to how they're going to go about opening and providing a service again for the Godalming and the villages. Thank you.
Yeah, I can update you a little. They have recruited a manager who's on the waiting to start when they do reopen. It's something that we have with all the centres, struggling to look at the moment how they're going to open. So one of the work streams that we're kind of working with them on at the moment is so for them to understand the guidelines. Actually, we're going to look at working with health so that they open in a safe way, and looking after clients, because that's what they're most concerned about, is how do they protect their most vulnerable clients. The Clock House are going to open up with their chiropody in the foreseeable future, and I think they're going to open up with their hairdressing in the foreseeable future. But all of them are very nervous about opening up, and we're working closely with them on that.
Okay. Can I ask Katie, should you just keep Councillor Wells
Absolutely.
informed?
I might get some advice as well.
Yeah, if it doesn't go the way we're hoping, that as part of the working group, that they'll need to know that. I've got two other people I've seen waving their hands. First is Andrew, and then it's Councillor Dixon after that.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's just really to highlight what's been said about how important it is we don't lose the tremendous work the communities have done, and the community resilience project that we're involved in. We had the meeting this afternoon that started with partners such as Health, Surrey Community Action, Voluntary Action Southwest, Surrey County Council, just so that we make sure we lock into what the thinking is of our wider partners. And then we've done the SWOT analysis that has come through from those organisations we work with and support. We're going to be consulting with the towns and the parishes. We want to capture what they've done. We want to be able to ensure that we as a council support and enable where we should and where we can, and certainly not lead necessarily, but as I say, support and enable. And one thing that came out clearly this afternoon was identifying what our residents need, because it's fine for us to think what they do need. And so some kind of survey, some kind of piece of work that drills right down to those particularly who may be missed in all the other pieces of work, the analysis, this, that, and the other. So we actually build up a borough-wide sort of picture of need. This is not a project that can be rushed. It needs traction and it needs to move forward as quickly as it can, but we need to capture what has been done, what is being done, and then what should be done, and actually what is needed, rather than perhaps what we think is needed. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, before I move on to Councillor Dix, funny enough, I'd actually written myself a note on my notes. I think it'd be really useful, because I think this is an incredible piece of work and very impactful, if at our next meeting that we just have a verbal update, and we don't want reports, just a verbal update. How is that work going? Have we captured it, and have we progressed it? And all the things you just said. So Yasmin or Kimberly, can we just put that on the next agenda as just a 5-minute update? I think it'd be good for this committee to have this ticking in the background throughout the year. Councillor Dixon, I think you're next. You need to come off.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I just had to unmute. I just noticed two things. We've got a lot of the day centres and services for the very elderly who are closed down at the moment, although they're doing community meals. And I just, when I read this over the weekend, I thought how sad it was that all these services had disappeared, because this is a population which is very much isolated. And while we're supporting them on the phone, I'm looking at things like, hopefully we're going to plan to get some services open, maybe outdoors, as soon as possible. Are we looking at that? And the other thing I was going to ask about the Farnham Maltings, are they thinking about opening their cafe? Because they do have a very big outdoor space outside the front of the Farnham Maltings.
I think with all of this, they're waiting on, certainly with the day centres, they're waiting on government guidelines to help them with getting the getting their clients back in through the door. I think it's been a bit of a chicken and egg, because to keep their centres open to run the community meal service has actually cost the centres, has impacted on their finances. So what they've had to all do is make some decisions around which staff would stay on to deliver the community meal service and which staff would be furloughed. So in that way, it's prevented them from kind of doing any real activity at the moment, because those staff are still on furlough as they work out how they're going to open their services. What they have been doing is lots of phone calls and supporting their residents. That's a question we can pose to them. We've got a meeting in 2 weeks' time with the day centres, because we're now meeting with them regularly to help and support them reopen. So that's something that we can say. Have you thought about doing any outside activity? The slight difficulty would be sort of geographically how you would get them to any one place, because they still then have to go into potentially the minibus, and that's again what they're kind of navigating. But you know, it's something that they could look at, and we can certainly sort of see if we can work together with them. Maybe Hopper could help transport some residents to a safe, you know, open space. But yes, the Maltings, Charlotte is here. She might not be able to tell you more about the Malting service and what they're planning, because she is their link officer. So I pass on to Charlotte.
Charlotte.
Hello. They're making an announcement shortly, actually. I've seen a statement that's come from Gavin Stride, their executive director, and he's, of course, watching this recording tonight. So I think they are intending to open parts of the building first as an initial step, with obviously programming and those sort of more programmed events coming on sort of later into the autumn. But I think the intention would be to look at the cafe and parts of the building opening up in the initial phase, and I think that could be as early as summer. I think, in fact, they're planning to hold their first outdoor market this coming weekend. So I can forward that announcement that's imminently coming out from the Maltings very soon.
Oh, congratulations, that sounds very, very positive.
Now, I see Kimberly's got a hand up, and I've also got a number of people like John Rubini, Councillor Forrest-Esky and Councillor Mirrelly. So I've got my list down here. So Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say I put my electronic hand on to begin with? Are we not using that?
Well, I have got it in front of me, so that's what I'm working down at the moment.
There are two or 3 points I wanted to make. First of all, going on, which may have been answered, the Hazelway, they were doing all their meals and wheels, etc. But of course, they had no income from their cafes and other areas where they earned money. I wouldn't say the situation is desperate, but of course, the model they have is that they keep going on the income that they earn. So they've had no income. Now, they have a small grant from Waverley. However, we are looking at how we get money in to keep them going once we get back to normality. Because, of course, they spent an awful lot in supporting the Meals on Wheels and other things. It was very good that they got the grant for the kitchen expansion, because it came in good timing to do these extra Meals on Wheels that they've taken over. Going on to the voluntary sector, I helped to run the Hazelmere Help scheme. And of course, at this moment in time, a lot of volunteers are being lost because they're going back to work. Now, we weren't allowed to recruit anybody over the age of 70 because, of course, they were being shielded, etc. So we could only rely on those underneath that. So we're losing a lot of volunteers already through going back to work, etc. So one of the problems I have is we opened the community store, and I know Paul Fellow's the same at Godalming. I am now seeing a rise in people looking for that as their money runs out. Companies are going broke, and we're seeing a lot of appeal for help. So in fact, we are getting more use for some volunteers that we may not be able to find. And the premises we are using will shortly, in August we believe, have to go back because they'll be open again. So we're having to look for separate premises to keep that store going. I believe strongly that this is not over, that we're going to have a lot of problems when furlough ends, when the cash becomes predominant. We're seeing more and more requests for charitable monies through people not having money. CAB are sending us people. We have a charity trust run through the Penny Halfpenny one, and I think things are going to become much more difficult.
Yeah, I think you're right. Katie, I see you poised.
Yeah, just to say, going back to the community meal service, yes, the fact that all the centres have remained open and had to keep staff on, that their costs have not been covered through the price of the community meals that they've been delivering. So actually they've all been working with Jane so that we can sort of harness and gather that information so that we can you know, put that forward to our directors and actually including Andrew, my head of service. So we're just gathering that information at the moment and they're working with us. We did give them all a small grant of £750 right at the beginning to enable them to buy the additional equipment they needed, particularly around the plastic boxes and for delivery, for what you serve the meals in and things. So, you know, we helped them just initially to sort of help them with that impact. Certainly, Eve has been working quite closely, John, with Councillor Vini, with the community store, and I think they potentially found a new venue, the George Denyer, and I think she'd met people out there on Friday to have a look at it. So again, it's sort of looking at alternative venues that we could use to move the community store to. Hardship is certainly one that is on key on our agenda, and we've been working with the CAB, who are looking at working in partnership with the Rotary for a coronavirus support fund. The aim is not to duplicate any other funding out there. The aim is that they would connect up with any other funds, because there is a Farnham hardship fund, but obviously that's just for Farnham, and there's poverty elsewhere that's starting to happen in the borough. But that hopefully will be launched soon. So again, that could support some of our most vulnerable families. But yes, we've definitely, the feedback is they're seeing an increase in poverty.
Okay, thank you for that. Next person I've got is Councillor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman. And can I just start by saying thank you very much for your lovely, warm welcome. And I am absolutely delighted to be back and be a part of this committee. And I'm happy to help wherever possible. So thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I think the report is excellent. And I think Katie and her team done an excellent job. We do owe the voluntary sector and our staff a debt of gratitude. I witnessed firsthand during my year some of the amazing stuff that goes on in our communities, people who were there long before the pandemic, who really rose to the challenge during the pandemic and will still be there long into the future as well. I think there's been several really valid points made here, and I think Katie mentioned one of them, and that is grassroots level. People who work at grassroots level really know their communities and really know what their communities need, require, and all our communities are different and diverse in so many ways, but we do have local people who know exactly what's going on. But going forward, I think John's point, Councillor Rubini's point is a very, very important one. Coming out of this is going to be equally, if not more, difficult, because we were going to see the evidence and the fallout of so much of the hardship that has been seen, and it's been a bit like a war zone. We won't know what we're really tidying up until we get to see exactly the casualties as a result of this pandemic, and that will be stretched across the platforms, from poverty to job losses to mental health and so forth and so forth. So I think we really need to continue to identify all those individuals out there who maintain and continue to maintain into our voluntary sector. I think it's also important as well to note that we are a borough who has a massive, massive wealth of facilities, and we should really be using those facilities to identify them. To pick up on Councillor Dixonson's point, we should be looking at venues that will accommodate going forward, maybe small gatherings when legislation allows us to do so. So as people have got somewhere to go and something to do on a social level, because I think it's really, really important that people now start to get together, because I think it has done so many people a lot of harm because they've not been able. We are sociable animals, and that is something we haven't been able to do. So I think we need to maintain our voluntary sector. We need to look at our facilities that we have here in the borough, and we need to be creative going forward. But once again, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be part of this committee. Thank you.
Good. Councillor Miralise.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Andrew, when you said that you wanted to identify what people needed, I just wanted to know what you meant by those needs, because there was does that include the isolation and loneliness? You know, that was part of something that we were looking at a long time ago. But I just wanted to know exactly what you meant by what people needed, what we were looking at.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it really is that. What do people need? One thing I was going to say earlier is that we've met with all the SLA organisations now. It just happened to be the particular time of year when we review the SLA, looking at the upcoming year and reviewing the past year, and the difference in some of them and how a number of them have really risen to the challenge of the pandemic. Others really haven't, but a number of them are looking at how they can redefine their services. One of the issues that has come out is that because day centres as we know them probably won't operate in the same way, at least not for a very long time, some of the services around much higher need clients, those suffering from dementia, etc., will not be met, probably won't be met by those organisations. So we'll need to identify with our health colleagues, Surrey Community Action, the voluntary sector, Voluntary Action Southwest Surrey, right down to the towns, the parish councillors. You all know people in your parishes, the faith groups. It's a fairly big exercise, but when I say need, I mean, what do people need? Do they need support with, are they lonely? Do they need support with shopping, going forward, financial? We've got to try to establish what that is and get a clearer picture, a granular picture as possible of what the needs are of residents in the borough. As I said, this is not going to be a quick exercise. It has to be thorough, and we will need to be able to respond to that with our partners, towns, parishes, and so on. So it is actually, what is the need out there? And as the day centres might not be meeting some of those needs, particularly on those higher need clients, we need to find out what they are. And I say it's not only us, it's health, it's the county and the voluntary sector as a whole.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll come to Councillor Hyman in a second because I've got no more hands up or ones to go down. Thank you. But before we do, can I just ask that it's put into the minutes? This committee wishes to express its gratitude and admiration, not only to the voluntary sector, but actually to Waverley Borough Council, to the people who have, I know, worked incredibly long hours, taken on different tasks. Nothing's been too much trouble. And I think sometimes we forget to say thank you to our own staff. So if we can just put it into our minutes, and I'm sure Annie and Andrew and the others will pass on those thanks, but it certainly has been noticed and appreciated. Councillor Hyman, floor is yours for any questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, firstly, I can't find any email from Kelvin, which has been spoken of. I wondered whether there is one, where it might be, whether it was sent to all members, including subs, what the relevance might be, for it, whether it's about this item. I was just in the dark about that. In respect of what Andrew Smith says, what does the community need? What is needed? I assume we're still phoning around people, and we can ask. But I think what most people want is a need is an effective test and trace system, so that in the absence of any solution to the problem long term in terms of vaccinations, and that could be years before a safe one has been tested, that everybody would be happy to have a jab in their arm for, or whatever. We need an effective test and trace system. I wonder to what extent we are party to the information to ensure that we do have a very effective, perhaps even a leading system in Waverley ourselves, and whether we should be doing something about that, because, you know, Mary said that there are, you know, we've got local people out there who know what's going on. Well, I'm in terms of that, I'm not sure there's anybody who knows what's going on. I certainly haven't seen or heard anything of what's being done to really address the main problem for people, and that is, are they safe to go outside? What are they safe to do? And will they be safe at Christmas, or are we all going to shut down again? I see this item going generally as regards this item. I put down an awful lot of questions in respect to pages 14 to 16. I've got a question on virtually everything, and we don't have time to address all of those tonight. That we haven't really been through them. The other members haven't. So, who should I speak to about that, rather than do it now and sort of list a dozen questions? Who is best on our team that I can spend half an hour on the phone to in order to get up to date on what really is going on? Can you tell me that?
I certainly can. It will be Cttee, I think, is probably the one.
Yeah.
And clearly, you know, you're right, we could spend a whole meeting talking about this one item, but we have some other substantial items. So some of the tactical issues, I think probably Cttee and Andrew, between them, they will be able to point you in the right direction.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. Now, I think this item really is, to some extent, about the letter that's gone to the community organisations and the SLAs, where there was and it's at page 19 or something like that. If I remember correctly, yes, the letter's at page 19, and I think to some organisations that may have been a little bit of a shock. I assume everybody's read the letter and the pro forma SWOT analysis of the questionnaire that was put out to them. It says at the bottom page 19, our executive will consider options for the release of any future payments for the second half. I wondered whether that was going to be going to council or whether it is executive, and whether possibly there'll be any scrutiny of that. But more importantly, the issue, Chairman, of clawback, which is on page 20, where it says for organisations that receive a smaller grant in one tranche, this may mean clawing back some grant if appropriate. A retrospective recalculation of the words being used there, and that could well be very difficult. And obviously, it's not something that we can talk about on an individual organisation basis in open session anyway, presumably. But I thought if we send that letter out and we've got a survey for people to fill in. I note that we'd asked them to send it back by a fortnight ago, and I assume that was so that we could have some sort of report on it to this meeting, because that would have given officers a day and a half to perhaps produce a 1 or 2 sheet summary of the responses. So, how many responses how many organisations did we send it to? How many were received by the 10th of June? Have they all been received now? Are we chasing for those? You know, have we got useful information from that? I know Katie said that we were going to take this further with face-to-face things, but we're going to need some sort of evidence that can be presented to members at some point. So, you know, obviously we do want stuff to come from those. I'll leave it at that for now, unless anything comes up in the response. But can we particularly address the issue of, you know, I think that this item is about, which is mainly that survey that was sent out and how we're going to be clawing back and dealing with the community organisations. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Katie, if you want to start off.
Yeah, I'll take them separately because they're actually 2 different things. So the letter is to the service level agreement organisations. It didn't come as a surprise to them. We spoke to them individually before a letter was sent out. So no letter, they didn't receive any letter cold. We talked about the financial challenges of the council going forward. So at the moment that letter was written to say that dependent on the impact, the financial impact to the council, where they would have to look at the second tranche funding. It was also around the fact that some of the organisations have also suspended services and furloughed staff, so they haven't been, some of the services have not been having to use all their funding as well, so they might not have needed it, and some of them haven't been delivering some of the services that the funding is specifically for. But from my understanding, no decision has been made yet, and you know, I think Annie or Andrew could talk you through that process. The SWOT analysis that we talked about, this is part of the wider the project. So this sort of came in the sort of third part around the recovery project, and it's around the community resilience recovery project, which is part of the recovery, change and transformation program. So at the moment, this is just beginning to harness the information with some of the organisation, with the organisations on what they found worked well, what hasn't worked well, what are the weaknesses, strengths and opportunities. It's gone out via Voluntary Action South West Surrey have a very large database of all our community groups. So I think it was something like 900 groups have received it. So it hasn't only just gone to our service level agreement organisations. We will all, as Councillor Dean has sort of said earlier, we will feed back on this piece of work at each overview and scrutiny committee. So at the moment, we're still gathering the data along with some of the data that that Surrey County Council have been working on, and some of our health colleagues and voluntary sector. So we're kind of pulling it all together. So we'll be able to bring that back to the committee, and really what we're hoping is that will shape some of the future way that we will engage and work with the community. So that's part of a longer piece of work. It was just sort of to demonstrate to you that we're now thinking of recovery, not just response. But you know, I can answer more detail around sort of any specific questions if you want to outside of this meeting. More than happy to.
In fact, Councillor Hyman, it's not just that recent phone call where people were told there was, you know, there could be some issues with funding. I can think of, you know, the last few years that message has been consistently given anyway, because you know, our funding difficulties haven't just started in the last few months. So that message has been a consistent message. I've got a couple of people with their hands up. I've got Andrew Smith, if he wishes to come back, and then Councillor Wilson, I saw a hand wave at me as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's just to say that, that Cttee and I will be happy to set up a Zoom meeting with Councillor Hyman to go through the questions on the report. In terms of future funding and what recommendations we put forward to the executive, they'll come forward to full council as part of the way we're looking at the budget, and that's an ongoing process at the moment. And the other point I was going to make really was to echo what Cttee says, that we will bring an update for this committee each time we meet. The SWOT analysis is quite recently in, we're still analysing it, and we're speaking to partners about it. So as I say, we will be very happy to give you a report at each meeting on how the project's going.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Wilson and then Annie Wrighton afterwards.
Hello, everybody. Just a thought, but if any of the organisations, because they were unable to use or provide the services, have a surplus, then surely the most sensible way to use it would be to redistribute it to those who have made a loss, but actually have put a lot of effort in. Would that be possible?
I'm sure they've taken that point on board. It's the same point I had thought, but we have to be sensitive and we have to be very careful how we deal with this. I'm sure Andrew and Cttee will consider a valid point and see whether that's practical or not. But thank you for raising that. Annie, if you've got any points to wrap up before I move on.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, everyone. Just in terms of what Andrew and Cttee were saying, we've had to look at the service level agreements because some of them we are paying for very specific services and we're paying towards wages, which are now being claimed through the furlough scheme. And actually, the use of public money to double fund wages is rather difficult. So we do need to look at it, but what we're also looking at is there are fixed costs that some of these organisations have got, whether they're open or whether they're closed. You know, they've got to pay electricity, there are background costs, and we need to get a handle on, they may not have been delivering the service, but they may still be incurring those fixed costs. So we need to take that into account. Take into account if we are double funding things that it might not be legal to double fund. And look at the fairness of the situation, but absolutely no decisions have been made on it at the moment. We're just exploring where we are in a very tight budget situation and trying to assess what people did. And some of these organisations went above and beyond for our communities. We really do appreciate that, and nothing will be done in haste, but it's just a consideration of where we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie. And as I said, I think for the next 12 months, I think this will be coming back to every meeting, because this is a moving beast, to say the least, and we need to be nimble on it. Okay, I'll move on to the next item, because I think, again, the next item is quite a chunky item, but I'm sure Kelvin will summarise it concisely to help us on this. So it's agenda item 7, which is pages 27 to 40, which is the Farnham Museum. Kelvin.
Thank you, Councillor Dinas. Yeah, I'll do my best to summarise. Firstly, for Councillor Hyman, what was sent round we will share at the meeting, but that was a summary of the report option summary that was requested at the chairman's briefing for good reason, because Charlotte and I have gone into a lot of detail in the report, but we were very keen that members were appraised of the challenging situation at Farnham Museum. So I'll just do a quick summary. We've had low-level scaffolding up since November 2018. This is for health and safety reasons. So this is because the cornice and the parapet wall is cracking. And if that fell, that's a significant weight. The only way the structural engineers felt a construction of scaffolding would survive, would sort of protect residents or people walking along there, would be a low level scaffolding. Now, this has not been ideal. So this impacts upon museum, because it's directly in front of the museum, blocking off a grade 1 listed building. Some of the residents find it difficult, local residents, to get out of the Bishop's Mead next to it. So it's far from ideal. But what we've tried to seek to give members the idea of from this report is, initial thoughts were we had a budget of 150,000 to repair the wall. When the structural engineers looked, they estimated it could be between 450 to 500,000. So that is why there's been a delay. Where we are now is in the predicament of what do we do going forward, because you can only carry out the repairs during certain times of the year. So that's the spring, summer. So it's a lime mortar. The bricks have to be specially made because it's a beautiful Georgian building, grade 1 listed. So we have to make a decision. If we want to do any repairs next year in April 2021, a decision needs to be made by October 20 this year. So that allows time to order the bricks and book in the specialist bricklayer to do the works in the right time of year, spring, summer. Now, what I'm looking for from this committee really is for views on different options, so that I can feed back to an executive meeting so that we can bring forward options to move this project forward. Charlotte and I and Gavin, who's on the call from the Maltings, and the curator, we want this resolved, but it's a tough decision. So the options we've set out in the sheet that was sent around to all members, apart from Councillor Hyman, I believe. Is there any way from, I'll take Democratic Services can come back and see if we can share it on the screen. But in essence, there's a real challenge and we've got some options to look at. So this will be the end of my summary when I do this.
Yeah, if you can go through that option paper, just so Councillor Hyman's aware. When I read the report, it's about, well, I don't know how many pages it is, 13 pages. There was so much detail. It's actually quite confusing to distill what each option, what the costs were and what were the benefits, etc. So I asked Kelvin today to just produce the document, hopefully you've got in front of you, to try and make it easier that each option is together. Maybe, Kelvin, if you just talk through those options and any views you have and any costs, if you can just mention them.
Okay.
And we'll take it for questions, because I know I've got Yasmin who's got a hand up at the moment.
So, Councillor, would you like me to go through all the options in one go, or pause at each one for questions?
We'll pause very slightly on each one, because I think otherwise we could lose the track of the questions.
Okay, right. So option 1 is the council pays for the repairs and continues to offer the museum from the building. So this is irrespective of the costs, we move forward and it prevents deterioration, increasing costs. So every time, all the time we delay, there's potential for the building to deteriorate worse. It brings the safety scaffold to an end, and an important architectural sort of heritage asset is preserved for public use and enjoyment. So that brings it back in. That contributes to Farnham's cultural destination and offers some potential for external funding. What I've tried to do is, that's the building and then the museum service, and that will enable us to develop plans with increased certainty over the future of the building, so that we can plan with the Maltings on how to offer the museum service. And it's position the house as perhaps the jewel in the collection and exploit the asset to its full potential. So those are the pros. The cons, as I've talked about, this is probably a £500,000 repair cost, and that's hard to justify in the acute sort of pressure on the council's budgets at this time. Public support may be therefore questionable about funding this, and there's competing pressures from other service priorities. And it must be remembered that other towns and parishes in the borough don't have a museum that's supported by Waverley, like Farnham. The museum service, the building, although beautiful, we must remember has no disabled access to the first and second floors because it's a Grade 1 listed building and old. The ongoing burden of maintenance costs will not go away. This is an old building, we can expect ongoing costs. There's restricted access for deliveries and school drop-off. And obviously we have the ongoing museum management fee cost that would continue if we took this option.
Okay, I've just got a couple of questions, and then maybe we just then open it up for that option. To me, safety comes first. We can't have a building that's unsafe, so I think that's a given. Do we have a current value of the property with repairs and a current value of the property without repairs? i.e., if it's going to cost us £500,000 to do the repairs, does that maintain that £500,000 in its value or not?
I will need to confirm that, councillor, so I'll come back with that summary for you. At the moment, it sits as an asset to the region of 1.4 million on the capital receipts in our accounts. So but I think that's valued at, if the repairs are done, 1.4 million. But I can confirm that and send it round to members to make it sure it's accurate.
I suppose my issue would be is, if we don't do the repairs, is it going to end up being worth £500,000? And therefore, as a council, actually you've got to invest to actually protect our asset. But it's just, I've opened it up now. I've got Yasmin has got a hand up. I don't know whether Yasmin still needs to come in.
Yes, Chairman, I just wanted to say about the document, because we hadn't received any apologies, I wasn't aware that the substitutes would be attending. Obviously, they're very welcome to the meeting, but I've now sent that round to the substitutes for the committee meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And the only other hand I've got up is for Councillor Dixon, but is it on this one or is it on a general point? Sally.
I would just like to talk about point 2 in the against column, which is public support may be questionable, because I think there's two things we need to say here. It is true that there has been a survey done of what Farnham residents value about Farnham, and the museum wasn't there. But the point is, I think we need to go back. So whether or not the public support the museum is maybe, well, that obviously is why this, but the point is the building itself is a Regency building on East Street in Farnham. It's only a very short walk from Waitrose. It's an incredibly beautiful building. I've been there numerous times. It was a real shock to the system from one day to the next to see the scaffolding going up around it. and the building belongs to Waverley. So I think the public, what would be absolutely undeniable is the public would support the repairs to this building for it to retain its the quality of the building in Farnham town. And I think that there would be a huge amount of support to see this building repaired.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else want to raise an issue on this option one? I think I've got Councillor Miralise has got a hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Sally Dixon about this. I think the problem that lies within this building is not the building, it's the museum itself. It is not exciting, it's pretty moribund. I think the building itself is such an important part of that, our high street. And from what I think, I mean, you know, I know we've been through austerity, but for goodness sake, we have had a hell of a long time to sort this one out. And it has gone on and on and on. And I don't really know why. There's always not enough money. And now we're in a very difficult situation. But I really feel that you do need to speculate to accumulate. And I think you've got something here that could, I mean, when we had that meeting all that time ago, last summer when it was, Gavin and other people were there, had all sorts of inspiring ideas for how they could bring this place alive. And it is something that we should, I definitely believe we should actually do something about. I can't see, I mean, it's not like a bad car. You know, when you get a bad car and every time you mend it, it goes wrong and you just got a bad car, but this is a very beautiful building. It's very much an icon of Farnham. And I really think that we have to try and do something to also, you know, in terms of Farnham as a town, in terms of inspiring people, we're in such a dreadful place at the moment. And I think we have to think more of what we have got to look forward to and what we can do. And you have given us, Kelvin's been through all sorts of things on here about what we could do grant-wise, what we could, you know, find to do. I do think it's a question of really just working out how we can make the museum itself attract, whether that's to move it or not. But the building itself, I think, is not something we should release. It shouldn't end up in some developer's purse, making them a ton of money as it turns into a residential place, which people just walk past, which is actually meant to be part of their community. So that's, yes, that's how I feel about that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There's a lot of what I agree with you, especially I don't want developers to be making money on that. And a difficult decision, which ultimately will sit with the executive and the council, is when you look at the next item on the agenda, which is about leisure centres, which, you know, some of them are falling down and are costing huge amounts of money. So you have to balance, you've got some massive needs there, massive needs on the museum. That is the difficulty. They have that's got to be balanced out. Now, I can't see everybody on my screen at the moment because obviously we've got a document up, but I think, is there anybody else who wishes to, can you use the electronic hands up because that might make it easier?
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Hyman, I'd wish to speak on this bit.
Okay. Go ahead.
Can you, I would ask, I've got the email, for, thank you very much from Yasmin, so I don't need it on the screen here. If everybody else has got it at home as well, we can go back to normal life on the screen, can we? Thanks very much, that's better. Yes, thanks for that. This is our responsibility. It's a listed building. It is our responsibility as Waverley Borough Council, and the officer report, I think, explains very well why we have to do this anyway, really, regardless of whether we're selling it or what we're doing. We're going to have to do the repairs. And, you know, if you're looking at what will the people of Farnham say, then they'd probably say, well, you spent £4 million on the extension for the Memorial Hall. Why can't you spend £500,000 on something that's, you know, what you try and call the jewel in the crown or collection or something? We've used that over Farnham Park. We can't use it for this as well. We'll get lost. Sorry, Kelvin. But it is our responsibility. And one of the things that we perhaps should consider is that the costs of building works and whatever could well be reducing over the coming months and particularly years due to the deflationary effect of COVID. There could be a lot of price competition on wages, and I don't know whether there'll be deflation on the building materials wise. That it's possible there could be some inflation on the building materials, but nevertheless what we've been presented with here has been presented as a worst case scenario, the £500,000, and perhaps we ought to be looking, time permitting, looking at whether we can get that reduced. You know, we certainly wouldn't want this to be a like Memorial Hall for it to rocket from the first quote that we put up. You know, we wouldn't want this to quadruple in price or whatever and end up spending £2 million.
Gary, sorry, can we get to the point, because I'm conscious we're in an hour, so can we be a little bit more concise so we can answer the question?
Well, what we've got here, I think, depends. The option for this option, it's the one I think that we have to go with, regardless, because it is our responsibility in law. But the solution which Gavin Stride's team and his team put to us last September obviously may not apply anymore, and you as chairman have probably got the right to let him into the meeting if you wish, to tell us whether what was put forward then can still apply, because I know the Maltings were willing to really spread themselves thin and would need financial support from us to be able to do the exciting plans of the performance and whatever that they were aiming for. So I don't know whether you can bring Gavin in, but the question really is, if we've got to have a 4-month lead in and we're going to start in April, it's slightly confusing in the report. Does that mean that actually what we've got to do is to get people on site in January? So, you know, the time span we've got, if it's going to be done next year, because it's not being done this year, if we're doing it next year, do we have to get people on site January? So is it between now and January that we have to have all the decision making made? And
you have to order the bricks in November because they have to be
I know. I'm asking, does the 4-month start of being on site from January, because it says we start in April and then it says we need 4 months lead in? So does that mean we have to start in January from what it's saying, or does that mean we have to start in April?
They can't do the build in January because they are.
And I know that's not the question.
Sorry, I don't want to get into a debate. If you want to speak, can you raise your hand, and then otherwise it just we lose control of the meeting. So I will come to you in a minute. Is there anything else? Because we've got the other options to quickly talk through, and then we've got to consider what we think is the appropriate option. So the thing about the dates, and can we just wait and get through the options, and then we can wrap it up with any comments?
Well, I suppose the basic question is the original Maltings plan we saw last September, is that still on the table, or would we need to be looking at a different plan, in which case we might need to start this conversation again? Thanks.
Okay, well, I'm sure Kelvin will speak in a minute on to update. Kelvin, do you want to come back, and then before I get to Sally, because I think we've got to keep control, that we keep it to the options. You need to unmute.
Okay, sorry, Kevin, am I okay to speak now?
No, Kelvin's speaking at the moment. So Kelvin.
Thank you, Chair. And what is pleasing to hear is the passion that councillors are expressing, because we do need to feed a very clear message back to executive for them to consider. And I think we strayed into option 2 already from councillors, which is we've got to do the repairs irrespective of how the building is used in the future. And I think members have already basically explained that that's where their view is. But the pros and cons on that is we just make the building a stronger, more valuable asset. It brings it back into view, as the councillors have said. And then there's options of whether the museum continues to operate there, or we look for a different place for the museum service. Again, there's always cons, and I come back to the other one. We tried to be as fair as we can with the pros and cons, but the financial risk, if we did it up and we're proposing to sell it, exists. It's not the best market at the moment to sell. And it'll create an uncertainty for the museum service. the third one, I think if I go through them all, council, it might be best that we take them in the round. Is that we just sell it in the present condition? But I think you've already alluded to that, Chair, as the reality is that means you're selling, you know, a defunct car, if you want. You're not going to get the best price, full market value as it stands. So it won't potentially attract the buyer, and public access will be restricted, and we'll lose an asset. And then the final one that we thought was a potential option was that we defer taking an action again, and we accept that the building will continue to, the scaffolding will stay up, the building will continue to deteriorate, and I think it will materially impact upon the museum service if we don't resolve this issue. And it is fundamentally a two-issue thing. Let's get the building sorted is the fundamental question I'd like clarity on from the members today. And then obviously there's the museum service, which Gavin and Charlotte are far more experienced in being able to present them myself. But the fundamental thing that's held up progressing the museum service is not repairing the building.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. And I'm very keen that we don't go into the tactical side about should it move to the Maltings. We're not going to resolve that, and I think it's just going to complicate it. And I've got a number of speakers, but I'll just give my couple of points whilst they are fresh. I mean, looking at your options, the last one, council defers any action in 2020-21. Us sticking our heads in the sand, I don't think we can do that. So that would be my view on that. The third option was about selling it in its present condition. Well, financially and culturally and everything else, that wouldn't be a particularly wise move. It's an option, but I don't think it's an option we should consider. We know the building needs the work and it needs to be made safe. I think almost option one and option two could almost be the same. The question is, should the building be repaired? And then everything else, I think, follows on how are you going to do it, how are you going to do the museum, how are you going to improve it, is it the right location, everything else. But to me, option one and two really saying, are we going to do it or not? And to me, that's it. And my personal view is we should. I think there's lots of questions on exactly how the museum's run, does it move, does it, how that happens. That's not what we need to decide today. This is about the financial big decision. Do we think it's right that we do something with this museum? So my view is yes, and then keep all the tactical side really for other meetings where that can be worked through. So that's why I'm at now. I've got a load of people. All I ask is, can we keep to the point and try and not repeat what other people say, because I've got loads of people. So I've got the first one is Councillor Mirrlees.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I wanted to ask actually Councillor Beeman a question. And this would be, because my feeling is, yes, if you've already heard, yes, we should get this sorted. We should get the work done. But I also wanted to, I mean, this may horrify people, but I know Waverley has quite a lot of what I call assets. And I did hear that there was, for example, a painting that we owned, which is of Cornwall, which has got nothing to do with Farnham, which we're sitting on, which could actually benefit if we sell things like that, which we're in a position now where we need to make money, and we have to go through the family silver, frankly. I just thought whether David with Councillor Beeman knew about that, whether the idea of selling that, and I don't mean just for Farnham because that would be far too greedy, but that would go to a leisure centre as well in Cranley, whether if that is a possibility, that's all. So yes, is that something that one could be looked at in terms of funding?
I think rather than bring David in, I think he would have heard your comments. I think Councillor Follows is also listening in as an observer. So, that may be something that the executive wish to look at, and what's good value and what they should be doing. So again, I don't want to get into that now. They've heard it. I know Councillor Follows has acknowledged that. We will leave that to them. I think our decision's much simpler than that tonight. Now I've got a number of people, so I'll try and do it in the order. I've got Councillor Else and then I've got Councillor Dixon.
Sorry. I agree with you, Chairman, that we should certainly preserve this building and we should keep it. It's a precious asset for Waverley. I do think we should also at the same time remember, temper our collywobbles about spending all this money with the thought that there may well be a grant somewhere that we can get to lessen the output. And so I think, however, another thing just to keep in mind, in the back of our minds, that the grants, some of the grants will be depending on whether it's going to remain as a museum. But there are still other grants out there, whether it's a museum or not. So I think we should go for it. We should be bold. We should be risk averse. I think Kelvin likes to be risk averse, and I wholeheartedly support the principle that we should be preserving it and keeping it. Thank you.
Thank you. Very similar to my view, so thank you for that. Councillor Dixon.
Yes, I mean, I think this process of reviewing the Farnham Museum has been going on for almost a year now, and there's been a number of meetings, which most of them I've attended. So I've met all the staff of the Farnham Museum, and it's used to say they've got a very good team in there now, and there is a lot of opportunities for making the museum more vibrant, and also for applying for additional funding. And it is worth mentioning that as we've got a couple of decisions to make tonight, but one of the decisions is whether or not part of the money we give to the museum is to allow for somebody to be employed writing off for grants. And it is felt that although we have to start the buildings, the repairs, we would also be able to get grants, I believe, from a number of bodies to help with this. The other thing which is really important about this is that the work that needs to be done on this building is highly specialist, and it requires a number of craftsmen. And actually these people are mostly local to our area because it's a very distinctive building and it's very it's local. It's a Regency building, of which Farnham has quite a few, but also the southeast have got quite a few. So if we did go forward with this, we would actually be employing local craftsmen and employing local businesses. And I think this morning we've been hearing a lot about how we need to bring the economy out of the COVID recession, and this building project would be a very good beacon of hope for us to say, yes, this is something we go forward with confidence. It's going to create jobs, it's going to create wealth going forward. We may be able to find, because it is a building project that there's government grants we can apply for because it's part of a development of the town centre. So I do feel we should say to the executive, yes, it is a lot of money, but it's been on the books for a long time. It really needs to be done. And it's a good, hopeful thing to be doing, looking to the future.
I totally agree. Thank you for that. Councillor Forashewski.
Thank you, Chairman. I wholeheartedly agree with what's been said. I could be parochial and say I would like to see a leisure centre in Cranley, and perhaps the money would be better spent there. But having said that, I think this is a heritage asset. It should be preserved. We shouldn't be wasting time. We should be getting on with it. We should be looking after what we've got as a borough. We should be proud of it. We should be preserving it for generations to come. So I'm quite happy to see a lot of other work being done in other areas to make sure we are creative in the way we fund projects. But this is one that if we lose it now, we'll never get it back. So I wholeheartedly support all efforts to preserve this beautiful building. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Kelvin, so really looking at the recommendations and going through the options, and I'll try and keep this nice and simple so we don't complicate it so you get a steer. And please shout, colleagues, if I get this wrong. I think there is support that the museum is repaired. That it's not sold, but it is repaired. I think the recommendations in relation to alternative location, I don't think really we should be getting into that until we know about the repairs. But I think my view would be the council will make the best decision on where the museum is sat and if there need to be changes. And you're doing lots of work. I know Gavin Stride has been listening in, and hopefully what we've said will be acceptable, and he'll be pleased that that there is that support. So hopefully that covers recommendation 1 and 2. And obviously you'll have to look at your timescales for getting the work done. Clearly it's got to go via executive, I would guess, because we're only a scrutiny function, and possibly even council with a value. Looking at recommendation 3, which was about using some of the capital budget that was set in 17 and 18 for your specialist bid writer, etc., for the collection and staying together. I haven't heard anything that disagrees with that as a recommendation. And I think recommendation 4, future of the museum service and collection belongs to the council if the assets are to be separated. I think that's a fairly tactical one that we don't need to be making a recommendation. I think what you need to know is, does this group support the museum being repaired come what may, and then tactical decisions to be made. Is it right? How do you work with the Maltese, etc.? So does that give you a clear steer, Kelvin?
Absolutely, Chairman. That gives us a clear steer to take back to executive. You are correct. It will be a council decision because it will be a sum of 500,000. So it will come back through the democratic process. For clarity, I believe we do need to order the bricks by November. So we'll be looking to bring something back to the October council.
Okay, before I move on, I see one other hand waving at me. Councillor Wilson, did you want to have a final comment?
Just one thing. I think the wording should say that we agree to repair Wilmer House as opposed to the museum, because that is a decision for the next stage, I do believe.
No, absolutely right. I'm sure our colleagues in Democratic Services always keep us under control on what's written, and so we get it right. And I'm sure Kelvin will see the wording to make sure it's clear what decisions we've made. I think Sally Dixon, I see your hand going up. Need to unmute.
One thing, can I just ask Kelvin? I think your document on the options appraisal for the future of Museum of Farnham is an excellent document, but can I just look at this point 2 again on the against for options 1, where you say public support may be questionable, because I really think that is very damning. And I wondered whether or not you couldn't say something like, in a recent questionnaire, the museum was not in the top 10 attractions in Farnham, if that is the actual case, or try and clarify where that public support may be questionable. I mean, to my mind, I would like that line just taken out of that document, because we're going to see this document, this options document, again and again. And I do think that point 2, public support may be questionable, could be removed. It doesn't really add anything at this point.
I just say, Councillor, the document that you refer to was just for us for tonight to try and sort of distill all that information into a 1-page document, which did just creep onto the second. Just to make help people like me try and digest all that information. This is not a document for anyone else. So your point will be noted, but we don't need to adjust documents. It was just to help us to try and make a decision rather than go round in circles, which this very easily we could have spent all night, debating on this one. So I think we've come to a good conclusion, Kelvin. I think hopefully you've got a clear steer. And thank you for the people such as Gavin who have listened into the meeting. I haven't called on them because I wanted us to sort of concentrate on the financial side to make sure we had an agreement there before bringing in other people, because that would have taking us to one side. Now, I think I've got a hand up with Councillor Hyman.
Yep.
Councillor Hyman.
Thanks, Chairman. Sorry, we hadn't been given the opportunity to speak on the issue of the specialist bid writer. You hadn't had anybody say anything because he didn't ask us. I feel that I find it very difficult to believe that we don't have somebody who's who can write bids at Waverley. We certainly should have. We've got 450 members of staff, and I really don't see why we should be paying money. But we've got no idea. I've seen nothing in here whatsoever that tells me how the sort of missing 60 grand or whatever that's already been granted to this has disappeared, and how much it would cost us if we're going to get a specialist bid writer in, and you know, who we've got available, what our options are on there. I do think there's a danger that Gavin Stride might be sitting there tearing his hair out, saying, "Well, hang on, we have to do all of this together because we need to get the future of the museum sorted, and we need to have, you know, look at and sort out the trustees issue, you know, or governance, future governance issues. We need to do all of that so that we can put together these bids." And we need to be able to put together those bids before we agree that how much Waverley's going to put in, or we're obviously, you know, if we're going out and telling people who possibly might give us a grant that, hey, the council's going to spend all the money itself anyway, then in a way that's going to undermine any bids or possibly undermine any bids we put in. So I do think that we might be heading slightly in the wrong direction by trying to separate out the decision on do we do it, where I think everybody says yes to that, but ignore the rest and leave it till later. And if it means we've got to have a load of meetings and a group to do it very soon, then that's what we should do. I certainly don't think we should be putting off all the difficult questions that this decision depends upon. Okay, thanks, Chairman. I've said my bit.
Yeah, no, I'll answer a couple of things that you've said about talking about trustees and structures. That is not our role here as an overview and scrutiny. We are here to look at the decision-making process and what's being put forward. I absolutely agree, all those issues need to be dealt with, but it's not for us tonight to be making those decisions on, you know, which trustees and which structure, and, you know, we haven't got that capacity in this meeting. I know Kelvin and Gavin and other people will meet as soon as they need to look at what is this decision made and what needs to be done in the near future. But we do not have to deal with things such as trustees and getting down to the nuts and bolts of how it's going to work in a scrutiny. That is not our role. But people know those decisions are going to be made. Those decisions may well come back to an overview and scrutiny once those meetings have happened for us to scrutinise, but not tonight because we haven't got those proposals what it looks like. So I think your point has been heard, and we will keep updating as these meetings go on. Kelvin, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, I tend to agree, Chair, but with both of you actually. I think now we've got, if we can get clarity with regard to moving the museum repairs forward, I think then it's the opportune moment to bring the working group back together and with the stakeholders, because we then can start thinking about the future. If we weren't in a position where we've made that decision, then getting the group together is almost, you know, it's sort of chicken and egg. So I think this is the right step forward. We can then reconvene, take this back to the executive, and then set up the local working group as we have previously to move the museum service forward as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And just one other point you made, Councillor Hyman, I think you said about missing money. I'm sure that there is no missing money. They have had specialist architects out. They've had to have all specialists because of it's a listed building, all the costs of scaffolding, etc., that has to be paid for. Kelvin, are you now happy with everything and the direction of travel? And
yes, I am. Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you. And we will happily break down the costs that have been spent on the project. That's not a problem.
And I think once you have those meetings with Gavin, now you've had this decision, we'd be happy for Gavin to come to a future meeting with yourself to sort of tell everybody how is it going, what are the implications, and how is that governance and those future arrangements. So though I can't see Gavin because I've just got his name up on the screen, I'm sure he would be happy to do that, and we can talk through some greater detail then.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna move things on, if I may, people. Next item is item 8. And again, it's Kelvin to open this, which is about the leisure centres.
Thank you, Chairman. I will try and simplify the challenge and update for you. So, in essence, just to summarise, the leisure centres were closed when the government on midnight of the 20th of March. Since then, and they still are not allowed to reopen. So indoor leisure activities are not allowed to open as of yet. So that actually constitutes what is known as a change in law. So we are looking at the contractual impact of that decision from the government and how we sort of come to an agreement with Places Leisure on moving that forward. So at the moment we're in discussions about the closure period, but coming along very quickly is the leisure centre reopening. Now, as I'm sure all members here can understand, we would not be opening the leisure centres and them being as they were before COVID-19. There will be many sort of operational issues that will need to be addressed before reopening. And at the moment, just to give a summary, we've been in discussions with Places Leisure. That will mean there'll be strict control of activities. So all sessions will need to be booked. Customers would need to queue outside of the building for their sessions and with staff present and then directed into the building to ensure they adhere to the one-way system that we put in place. The dry side changing rooms will be closed because they're not large enough to hold a significant number of people, and gym kit will be removed from the gym to ensure social distancing. There'll be marked spots on the floor, and lane swimming will only be with double lanes to again adhere to the social distancing issues. So I suppose what I'm just trying to alert members to here is we've got a financial challenge with the closure costs anyway, because that's a contractual arrangement with the leisure centres. And when they reopen, there is not only a operational challenge, but there will also be a financial challenge there, because the change in law provision will fundamentally impact the reopening of the centres as well. So we are currently in constant discussion with Places Leisure. We're meeting on a fortnightly basis, but a lot of it hangs now with the government making a decision as to when leisure centres can open. Once that decision is made, we would like it to make it clear to members and residents, the leisure centres will not be able to open on the next day. There will be a 3 to 4 week training for all staff to get the lifeguards back up to speed on the new processes involved. There'll be testing of equipment, dosing equipment, boilers. So there'll be a lot of setup time. 3 to 4 weeks we've been led to believe by Places Leisure before we open, from the decision that the government say we can open, and we are in agreement with Places Leisure as the type of operation that can reopen. So hopefully that gives an idea of where we are with the leisure centres. I'm willing to answer questions on that, or I can answer one more thing, the leisure capital investments. So we had agreement from council to move forward with investments in Farnham and Godalming, and we were exploring options for the new Cranley Leisure Centre. At the moment, all of those, Places Leisure are unable to commit to the business proposal that they put pre-COVID, because in essence they are in quite a financial predicament at the moment. So all of those projects will be deferred probably for six to 8 months when the centres are back open and we're back to some form of normality and able to assess leisure centre usage. I hope that helps, Chairman. I'm willing to answer questions.
Okay, thank you for that. I suppose I've got just a couple of points on the leisure centres. Clearly, there's a big issue with the Cranley one and the state of repairs and how much it's going to cost. Appreciate we haven't got a end time where we know when plans can be agreed, but we do need to know what's happening with Cranley with its general state, because going back to the analogy we had earlier on a car, this is just throwing old money after a bad thing. all the boilers need doing, you could spend millions just keeping it up to date. So I think for the next meeting, I think it'd be really useful to know the position on Cranley. That's probably the most topical one because it's in the worst condition. So that's that. And we obviously, although we don't need to go into detail today, we did have a call in for the Farnham. Now, obviously, it's not about what the decision is, it's about the process to the decision. So we need to resolve when that call in can be just considered to make sure that we're happy with the process. The decision may be irrelevant now or delayed, who knows, but there was a call in and we do need to, for openness and transparency, make sure we go through that process. So if we can just flag that in the minutes that that hasn't been done and that does need to be done, and we should do that no later than the next meeting, because I think it was just a matter of documents and it wasn't anything more than that. So I'll leave those points because we can record them, and then I'll open it up. I think I've got a couple of people. The first one, I've got Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I did bring this up for asking for an update at the first Zoom council meeting that we had. I didn't realise actually at the time that it had been called in. It's good to see it here, but I'm surprised that the call-in item isn't in front of us, because that's what should be the case. I thought that you would call them into the next available meeting or a special meeting in the meantime. And normally, I think there's a requirement in the Constitution that we fill in a form if we're calling something in to explain the reasons why. So the reasons for this call-in should be clear to us. And we would be able to decide whether we need to meet or not on this issue. So what was the reason for the call-in, and do we need to have a meeting for this call-in? I think that's why we've got this item in front of us. Was a form filled in? I think it's in Annex 6 or something like that to procedure rules and for calling in the Constitution. So yeah, what's the call-in about? What's it for, please? Thanks.
I can give you a very quick answer on that. A call-in form was submitted. All the members, bar one, were contacted to discuss the issue from obviously the ONS Wellbeing Committee. It was about the process, it was about the timing, it was about the lack of information that was provided to the ONS committee on a report that was going to come like the day before about a decision that, if we waited for the ONS meeting, had already gone past the call-in time. So it was discussed, the document was done, the full reasons were put in that form. The form goes to Robin Taylor where a decision is made, and it was accepted that there were some questions that needed to be answered about how the decision was made, when it was made, on what information was it made, and the fact it was going to go to council after the call-in procedure and after we would have had an opportunity to look at it. So in effect, it would have gone under the radar, and that's probably not the best way of describing it, but all the timescales would have gone and we couldn't have called it in and we couldn't have discussed it. So I contacted probably 5 or 6 members of the ONS. We discussed what the issues were. I think everybody, without fail, agreed that we needed to scrutinise that process, and that's our role. And once I had that agreement from everybody, we submitted it, and 3 of us signed it as per the normal procedure. It wasn't a party issue, so it wasn't, it was across all parties who felt it needed to be reviewed. That's what ONS is, and that's what we decided we should do.
Thanks, Chairman. Do those 3 members who signed it still feel there is a need for us to do it? I think that's the question I'm asking.
Right, I can see the one thumb up from Councillor Rabini, and I think the other one was Councillor Else. I'm trying to see on my screen. I've lost her, so I can't tell. And myself. There were actually others who we contacted, Councillor Wilson. Everyone was in agreement that actually that was our role, and we would scrutinise as we should on behalf of the residents.
And should you pause the meeting to comply with the legal constraints if Jenny else isn't part of the meeting at the moment?
No, she's here. I just didn't have her visually on to give me the thumbs up. That was the thing. So everybody's still in agreement, and the decision might be the correct decision. That's not what the call-in is about. It's about, was it done in the correct way with the correct timescales and the correct ability of ONS to scrutinise the decision. So the decision's irrelevant. It's about us doing our role. Okay, so I think we've had a bit of an update on the leisure centres, but I'll open it up now. I've got Yasmin has got a hand up. I don't know whether that was to notify me of anything. Yasmin.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to mention about the call-in, because since that happened, we actually haven't had a formal meeting of the committee. So I think it's understandable that committee members and substitutes will have questions about it. Obviously, we've had very special circumstances since that's happened, since the call-in was made. And you'll remember, Chairman and Councillor Mirrlees, from our agenda briefings, that we decided to be pragmatic about when to consider that call-in. We've got to be flexible about that. The papers, I know Tamsin and Kelvin have been working hard on, so they'll be sent to members as soon as possible. And I think I've put my wording on the agenda was we need to stay up to date with you about when the next time when it's considered appropriate to have that item. It's not gone under, this one hasn't gone under the radar. It's not been lost. It's very much still needs to be considered. It's just the difficulty with the pandemic has been a bit of an obstacle. So I think given the situation we've heard about leisure centres, I'm sure Fiona will have a view on this, but it's not necessarily an urgent thing at the moment. But we need to maintain monitor the situation very closely and make sure that call-in happens as soon as it can. Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, I'll just, we did have a discussion, and it was very much some of the other meatier items that we need to decide. The conversations I've already had with Kelvin, a lot of this is about documentation to show what the process was and times. So it's, we shouldn't have to wait 6 months to get this. This is just a matter of putting it together and then passing it to us members. And then we can take a decision whether we need to discuss it in a meeting at length, or whether we just show that actually we are satisfied and the documents clearly show it was done correctly. I just, I've raised this a number of times, as Yasmin will know, because I think it's important that we don't forget these things, because as life moves on and these difficult other decisions come, it's very easy to forget it. Unfortunately, I've got quite a good memory, and every time I speak to Kelvin, I mention it to him. So, there will be a review of the information. I would like to think it's sooner rather than later, but it's not something I've expected in the last month or so, when staff have been doing more important, time-critical roles with the pandemic and protecting our vulnerable. I think as we start to ease off that, I would expect something from Kelvin, the next month or so, when maybe it's a little bit easier. Questions on leisure centre and any other questions on the call-in? I think I had Yasmin, that's gone. I've got Councillor Foraszewski.
Once again, Chairman, thank you. We all know these are very difficult and unprecedented times. And, I just think the role of the leisure centres at this time is really, really important. And I really worry that leisure centres aren't casualties of COVID-19. I would say as well, and I think it's worth putting on record, that Places and Leisure have done the most brilliant job during lockdown. They have an app which has been absolutely superb. So they've been able to remain connected to a lot of its members and keep people motivated and keep people doing what's needed to keep them fit and well. It's essential, I think, for our health and well-being that we bring leisure centres as quickly as possible. I know as a government thing, but we bring this into the limelight as soon as possible. It's just really, really important as we start to come out of this and we plan for a future. It's never more important than people will need to think about their physical and well-being, and leisure centres offer that to so many people. And I would urge you, it's just so sad that I think we were at a point where we were so close to doing what we could, and I absolutely agree with you. Cranley Leisure Centre in particular, you know, we are just plastering over the cracks. Something seriously needs to be done to bring it up to a standard where it can operate. Do you know the real irony in all of this? I find it really unusual that we can open pubs and restaurants. Restaurants not so bad, but the pubs. But yet we can't open our leisure centres. I know there's probably some technical issues why that makes life so much more difficult. But you know, I just find it difficult to understand that our leisure centres may be a casualty of COVID-19, but our pubs will also be. But we can open up the pubs before we think of what we can physically do for our health and well-being. So I would urge everybody to really keep this on the top of the agenda and don't let it fall off the radar, because it is essential, more essential than pubs in my opinion. Thank you, Chair.
My pleasure. There's a couple of other points I'd probably want to raise. Clearly 106 money has been designated for Cranley Leisure Centre, and I know a lot of developers are keeping an eye out to make sure their money is actually being invested in the leisure facilities that it was given to. I'm sure you're absolutely aware of that, but I do see that as an issue. If we don't develop and we just paper over the cracks, I think there could be some feedback from that. But also, you know, leisure is a good money earner for Waverley, and there is no doubt that Waverley is losing money by having to keep repairing. I mean, I remember the roof falling off in the winds and all that. It's just money, and actually is losing money by not having better facilities that people can then come and use. So it's in Waverley's interest because it is a money machine. And the final point, and especially as we are a wellbeing ONS, you know, they do lots and lots of sessions for vulnerable people. People have had strokes, you know, people have difficulties, and in the leisure centre there are a lot of sessions that are being run. Absolutely. We have said that leisure centres are one of our priorities for this scrutiny group. That has not changed, irrespective of the financial position. It is probably our #1 priority, and we would expect at the next meeting, sorry to say, Kelvin, an update a bit more on, okay, we're hopefully coming through the main part of COVID. What does this actually mean? What does it mean to the plans? What does it mean financially? What does it mean with facilities? What does it mean with the locations that have been identified? I'd like us to maybe spend a bit more time teasing it out. And this isn't a parochial, but I think Cranley we just need, because it's in such poor condition, that little bit more focus at the next meeting on, so what's happening with Cranley. Any other questions, Kelvin? I'll come back to me, but then I'll open it up again.
I'll happily do that, Councillor Dinas, at the next meeting. But we must understand that this is coming out of COVID. Post-COVID is going to be quite a challenge for leisure, and I think it will probably need a slightly longer time. I can certainly do an update, but it'll be a longer time for us to really evaluate if it's fundamentally changed what a leisure offering you must give, so that everything we've done previously on investment in leisure centres, and we got there with Cranley, gave the council a return over the lifetime of its life. Now, what could happen post-COVID is fundamentally change the financial dynamics, and it may take me slightly longer to be able to come back with real detail on that the next meeting. I certainly hope to have much more clarity on the financial impact and the reopening of the leisure centres, but it may be the next one after that I can come back with really serious detail on Cranley Leisure Centre.
I absolutely appreciate that, you know, in the next meeting you might not have that sort of level of detail, but I think we just need to know possibly direction of travel, what are the big issues. You know, it may take 2 meetings before that financial position is done, but what I don't want it to do is come off the agenda. It's been a constant, as you know, on the agenda. You know, the public in Cranley, what we want to know. So part of it might be, what messages are you going to put out as a council to the community? Because up to now, they've been hoping that they're going to get new facilities. If that's not going to happen, we just need to, how's that going to be managed? So there's no expectations you're going to come with the final deal at the next meeting. But I think we need a bit more information, because we will have residents coming to us and we don't really want to be saying, well, we don't really know. So any other questions? Or any other desires? Val, I think I can see your hand.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reiterate your concerns with regard to physical well-being, and I've had a lot of contact with people of a similar age and older people that are self-isolating, not able to get out, not able to get their toenails clipped, and how much they rely on the services, for instance, of the leisure centres, where people that have had strokes and have dietary problems, and that they're not actually able to carry on with these. And it's just something off the top of my head, and it's probably not what we should be discussing now. But might we consider, with regard to the leisure facilities, if they're picking classes and workouts that could probably be done outside in the fresh air? Thank you, Chair.
So very good points. Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Foraszewski. I don't know if that is a new one or a previous.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back, because I think your point's really, really valid. And I think what we really, really need to keep in the forefront of our minds here, and I think Kelvin summed it up beautifully there, the changes that are going to happen over the next few months and years to leisure will be different to as we know them now. And we need to really kickstart our leisure centres with some new way of thinking, because we know they're going to change. Because this is where I'm really, really worried, because is it going to be a financial model for the leisure centre managers as it is? We may want what we want, but at the end of the day, if things are going to change so drastically and they can't do it viably, then I think we've really got to look at leisure. And the sooner we get this up and running and get some real work behind it, I think the better for all of us, because we'll have a much clearer, because we are going in a very different direction to the one that we've come out of. Leisure centres will not look the same in the future. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to come back.
My pleasure. And just really for your information, obviously leisure centres is on our work programme, so it means that we do regularly keep on top of it, because it's a work stream and it's one of our priorities. So just so you're aware of that. I can't see any other hands up. So Kelvin, again, I'm sure you're aware of what I suppose our requirements are. So thank you for that in advance. Moving on then to item number 9, which is the corporate performance report. I know Councillor Hyman's asked to speak, but I'll let them do their findings first. What I've said to both Kelvin and Andrew is we don't want them just to go through a list of every single corporate objective and talk to us. We want the ones which are the good news stories and the ones that are risky, and then we'll open it up to people. So to give Kelvin a 5-minute break, I'll start off with Andrew. If you can tell us which page you're on, Andrew, in the minutes, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I've got page 30, but I've printed it out. Yasmin, could you let the committee know what page it is for them, please?
I will try. I've got it on, I'm actually looking at it on the website, so it's not in an agenda pack. But for me, it's page 30 of the actual report.
That's right.
Oh, Kim's
that's
waving
right.
at me. Go on, Kim, just say it.
74.
Thank you.
Okay,
that's page 74. So yes, I really don't have a lot to say, Chairman. We won't concentrate, I think, do with the SLAs or that side of the communities. I think we talked about that earlier. Just to mention a couple of things in terms of community safety and safeguarding. Committee will know that there has been, and certainly before lockdown, a youth ASB problem in Farncombe. The Joint Action Group, which sits under the Safe Waverley Partnership, met on 2 or 3 occasions to look at that. And yesterday, there were CCTV cameras installed outside and just within Bowring House in Farncombe. And hopefully, as lockdown eases and the summer comes upon us, and we expect to see, and there has been a bit of a rise in ASB, then those cameras will help. That task and finish group will continue to meet, because we don't think it's finished just now we've got the solution with the cameras. We think particularly during the summer there could be ongoing problems, and we need to be on top of that. And then also just to highlight that the safeguarding policy for children and adults at risk has gone through and was ratified by full council, and so that now is up to speed. We still look to Surrey County Council because we're part of the overall safeguarding operation of the county through Surrey County Council, and there are constantly sort of changes within children's safeguarding and also adults at risk, and these are subjects I think that will come back to the committee in the future if we have to realign the policy to fit in with what Surrey are doing. That's all really I have to say, Chairman, and happy to take any questions now, if I may.
Questions, people? Okay, well, if we move to Kelvin, and then we'll go to Councillor Hyman with his questions. So, Kelvin, do you want to? And again, if you can give us the page number, that would be useful.
Again, Kimberly, I don't know if you can help. I'm on the web, and it's page 22 on mine.
I'm just checking. Won't be a second. It is page 22.
Oh.
So that will be
page 66.
Thank you.
22 of the document.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. All in all, in my summary, it's been an extremely good year for the commercial services. The ground maintenance was retendered successfully with embedding quality and savings. Wavy training services and Careline have performed really well, and we had a really strong start to our leisure centres as well, leading up to March at the end of the last quarter. All I would like to say, obviously, risk-wise, we've talked about the leisure centres already and the challenges to reopening them, and also I'm sure some of our members are aware of the challenges on visitor numbers to certain beauty spots or sites, namely Frensham Ponds. We've had real problems managing that, and we're working closely with the police, Surrey, and the local and highways just to try and resolve the impact on the site and the surrounding area. Generally, all the performance indicators are strong. As you will see, there are gaps on several of them. The leisure centres, obviously, we were unable to get the data because they were closed. The reason we haven't got the Careline data is a similar one, but in essence, we changed to a new system just as we were entering COVID, unfortunately, the coronavirus emergency, which meant I was unable to get the data. But it has been a good year for both of those services. And generally, there has been a few of my service plans deferred to next year. That's purely, I think, we were probably over optimistic at the start of the service planning setting, and we've ensured that those are encapsulated in next year's service plans. Thank you, Chair.
Before I open up, I just want to sort of again raise Wavy Training Services going from strength to strength, especially Adele, who runs a fantastic ship there. I think you recognise that, and maybe you give our thanks to her when you see her. And I'm sure Kimberly will just make sure that's noted. But really pleased how well that's doing. I've got Councillor Rubini as the first question, and then we'll go to Councillor Hyman if he's got questions. Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got two bits here that I wanted to bring up. First was the antisocial behaviour. You talk about the Farncombe area. I don't seem to get police reports for the Hazelmere area. We do have a problem in the High Lane estate, which we've identified, and we've passed it on to a single police officer when we eventually found somebody who would take the phone calls. Several people reported it, and it wasn't actually put through to the right place. So I'm not quite sure how the joint action groups deal with these things or how we get them to them. So I'd raise that, please. Perhaps they could look at how the reports get through from a council law to the joint action groups, etc. Now, my second point is about affordable housing. On page 75 or 31 in the report, and about the 7th, 8th paragraph down, we talk about affordable housing, etc. We have got a problem I've noticed in particular in Hazelmere, probably others, with affordable housing, with viability studies. I've brought it up many times before, and I shall bring it up at each and every time an opportunity I get. In the Hazelmere town centre area, for example, we have several planning applications that through viability studies, there is no affordable housing affordable. It's not there. There is none. Even though the latest application gave an agreement for 4, then withdrew and have now gone back to 0. So I'm finding it difficult. If we look again at page 77 or 33 on your reports, you will see there's a number of affordable homes delivered. Hazelmere is not mentioned. It's not happening. I think I need some help.
Yeah, can I just, obviously the performance document covers all of the ONSs and various, we're probably straying out of our remit, but I think having made the point, maybe Yasmin or Kelvin can speak to the right ONS group.
I think it might be me, Chairman.
Yeah.
Sorry, Andrew, yes. If you could take that away, just the point. I don't really want to get into a discussion because it's not really on our scrutiny radar, but the point's been made. So Andrew, if you can just take those points from Councillor Rubini away,
certainly,
and it's fed to the right meeting structure.
Yes.
And then they can come back and speak to you direct. Are you happy with that, Councillor Rubini?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Thank you. As I say, I'd like to raise it. It's a problem.
No, well, we're always flexible in this meeting as long as we're within timescales, and we just about are. So that would be really good. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. A question for Kelvin. It's since Continental have taken over the grounds maintenance or the street cleaning. Some of it's been very good, some of it's not been so good, but because my patch is absolutely full of weeds at the moment, it led me to ask a question of Matt Lank as to why we were like Tumbleweed Town. It looked as if it was an abandoned village in some parts, with weeds growing out of the pavement and the gutter, and I don't remember ever noticing that before.
Councillor Else, sorry, that I think that actually sits within the environment ONS. So
does it? Oh, I'm sorry. Just sorry, I was responding.
You know, street cleaning and stuff like that on this is ONS. So again, Kelvin, if you can take that point away, maybe if you need to speak outside and put it up, I imagine it sits within the environment ONS. That point can be raised with them. It's because we can't make a decision on it, so it's better to go direct to them.
Sorry, Chairman. I heard Kelvin mention Continental, so I went in. Sorry.
I did. Apologies, Councillor Else. I did mention it, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Just send me an email.
Will do.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hyman, questions? You had one for this?
Yes, thank you. Well, actually, I think Councillor Rubini and Councillor Mrs. Else have just shown us where the difficulty lies for members here, and that is that we're not really being directed to the bits that apply to this committee. We've got more than half of our committee papers in front of us, for pages 44 to 96 are on this item. There's an awful lot of it. There's a lot of information, a lot of hard work gone into it from our officers, but nowhere in it does it tell us which bits to go to and where are the red bits that matter to us that we ought to be looking at. And I mean, I've seen, for instance, Page 48, take off 44, Andrew, from anything I say. Page 48, there's in the corporate overview, does refer to some things which are within our remit. Page 61 is about community safety and COVID-19, and so that's certainly relevant to this meeting. Pages 74 to 76, it's got a headline of communities, and that's the only bit that actually says communities as though it applies to us. And there's quite a bit in there on those 3 pages. And my questions in there are, where are the examples? How can we quantify the performance? At page 82, again about COVID and the housing service, it says also the family support team has gone to Guildford Borough Council. That flew past me at some point over the past few months without me noticing it. I assume that means it's the downstairs bit at the front where Surrey County Council used to or I don't know whether they're still there. It implies the family support team isn't there anymore, I think. It talks about how the private sector housing team, and on page 84, it again, exactly as Andrew was saying, perhaps the most important thing to me certainly, which is understanding the needs of the residents and our tenants. So we do need to really to have a little bit of guidance on which pages, or perhaps have the report together so that we've got a few pages that apply to this committee rather than bits that are dotted all the way through it. I think it's made it very difficult. I'll stop there because we're on the 8 o'clock and I don't want to go past that, but there's a lot of things that could be said about these, but it could be a lot easier to do, Chairman. Thanks.
Yeah, and I know Councillor Dixon has picked this up, but it does actually say in the document which pages we should be looking at. But I do absolutely, I think it's page 46, if I've got that right. I mean, it's not for discussion, but page 46, there's a headline in orange saying pages 16 to 30 are the ones to be scrutinised. I think we just need to make, I suppose the point, Councillor Hyman, is we need to make sure we're really sure which bits we're doing, and maybe we can put a big asterisk or something on the pages, or try and make it a little bit easier when there's so many pages to read. But we can take that outside the meeting. But your point's well made, and I've raised this before about just dealing with the stuff that we should be dealing with. Yasmin, your hand's up. Is that for that point, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so we did in the covering report, so in the policy and performance officer's absence, Louise and I put this together, the corporate policy team, the 2 of us. So we used to have a covering report along with this that had, well, we do have a covering report, but it used to have in broken down which committee would look at which individual bit, because I appreciate that whilst the front page and the contents page does say which bits the committee should be looking at, Councillor Rubini was actually within that page range, but it's just that Andrew's service covers housing and communities. So I think it sounds like we need to put that back in. I think we thought that that was sort of well understood, but I appreciate that we need to put that back in just to make it clearer for the committee, because as you say, there's a lot of pages there, and it would make more efficient reading if we had that back in there. So we can certainly do that for Q1 next year. Thank you.
And again, like I say, Councillor Hyman, if you look at page 46, which is page 2 of that performance report, as you look down, really where it says scrutinised by Community Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 30th of June, and then it gives things in the pages. So it is there, but it is such a unwieldy document. I think your point's still well made. Right, so we are about 3 minutes over, which I don't like to be, but we've covered a hell of a lot of ground. Right, let's just go back to my agenda. I don't think we have anything to exclude the press or public. Now, is there anything anybody wishes to raise before we finish? Councillor Else, I see a hand.
Thank you. Can I talk about the forward work programme at this time?
I think at the moment with the COVID, I think we are probably running before we're walking with our staff being diverted and projects. If there's a particular question about one of the forward programmes, you could either very quickly raise it or maybe take it offline. But I don't think to go through the whole lot, we would normally
No, I want to add something to it.
Okay, so
I want to put something on it.
Okay.
And so therefore that would be Waverley's emergency plan. I want us to look carefully at Waverley's civil emergency plan. And I want to look, if this is felt to be appropriate, I want to look at, in retrospect, at how that worked or not in the recent fires in Thursley Common. So any aspect of that that can be legitimately looked at by this committee, I would like to ask for that to be examined. Thank you.
Okay, Yasmin, is this being looked at by any other committee first? So we want to avoid duplication if it's already been allocated.
This specific thing, I'm not aware that it is being looked at another committee. So I suggest we take that to coordinating board and make sure that there's no duplication for work, and put that on the work programme at the relevant committee at the appropriate time. Yeah, I think it's fair to have some scrutiny of that.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. And councillors, if you ping me an email of any of the points you want me to raise in the coordinated board, just so I've got your grounds and why you would like to do that. Annie, I see a hand up.
Just to say, the executive and the management board are looking at that, and there has been a multi-agency debrief this morning, which Councillor Else was at regarding it. So there are other pieces of work going on that link to it.
Okay, thank you. What I'm keen to do is that we don't duplicate it, but if there are questions that we want to check about how it impacts on people, etc., then it's a legitimate overview and scrutiny function, but we'll make sure we don't duplicate and another ONS are doing it. So it has a support, I think, checking that duplication question. Okay, lovely. Any other points, any other thing people want to raise? No? Can I just thank everybody? I think it's been doing a video meeting is quite difficult. You don't get that human interaction. I've got to say, I think we have covered some really difficult topics. I think we've given some guidance on some very, very difficult ones and shown an element of scrutiny. I think it's been a really good meeting. So thank you for your contributions. If there are points that we haven't covered, because it's been a hard meeting, just ping them to Kimberly or Yasmin, and we'll take them offline. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. What's left of it?
Thank
Cheers.
you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Kimberly and everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.